Okay, I'd like to call this meeting to order. Thank you. First, just housekeeping. We've waived the rules to allow photographers in who are present today. I want to welcome you all here and appreciate all of you being here, especially my colleague Mr. Adams here at an interim time. I know we generally don't have hearings during the interim session 3 weeks before the end of the year, and it's been one of those years, though. We have been just going nonstop, and in fact, in this interim, I've been to many different hearings. I'm a member of the Select Committee on Reform, and we've been having hearing after hearing on that. And in fact, that's one of the reasons, one of the things that brings me to this hearing, that the constant theme in the Reform Committee is oversight, oversight, oversight. Is that the legislature, we need to do different kinds of reform in the legislature, but it's only going to work if the legislature exerts its oversight responsibilities. And just as a sort of a general statement, one of the things, you know, we often get so caught up in the hurly-burly of the legislative process and in moving bills in and out of this institution that we don't take the time to do the oversight that's necessary with the different agencies, and I think that's to our detriment, and it's to the detriment of the state. And I'm one who's going to work toward changing that overall, not just in this arena, but in terms of trying to bring more oversight to the legislature, both because it's important for the effectiveness of the state, but it's also important in terms of regaining the trust of the public in government. You know, especially in these times of a term-limited world where it's often the time is constrained and folks often don't want to do the oversight, or when you're dealing with the bureaucracy can outweigh the legislators. But I think all of that has to be put aside, and we need to make a major focus on oversight, which is the reason why we're here today. There have been a number of issues that have been in the news and have come to our attention in different ways, which sort of cry out for oversight and explanation. So that's the reason for this hearing, and we're very. I'm very glad that we're having Director Iwasaka to come and join us today. He is the new director as of August, and you know, is very talented. He was known in California for getting the use of old tires and rubberized asphalt. He led the installation of the LED red lights, saving the taxpayer many dollars. He's received the Purcell Award for managerial excellence, and he's got a major job on his hands. And so we're really pleased that you're able to join us, and pleased that we're going to be partners with you. One other sort of, before I call you up, and just, you know, general statement, I want to sort of speak to all of you, but also directly to the director, is that personally, I'm a really big believer in infrastructure, and I think the way we are going to get ourselves out of our economic crisis is by growing our economy, is by building our infrastructure, is investing, and Caltrans is the preeminent partner in doing that. Caltrans is going to drive us forward in our economy, and the role and the federal money that's going to be coming through Caltrans, that is coming through Caltrans, is going to make that possible, and it is in many ways the most important agency for moving California forward. And I want you to know, and everyone to know, that I will be your partner in that, and I will work around the clock to help with those infrastructure issues and to help you and the agency grow and build. But toward that end, the other aspect of that is we need to make sure that the dollars that are spent effectively and efficiently. And so we're going to, you know, ask a lot of questions today, a lot of tough questions about how dollars have been spent and what we've been working on. And I want you to know that it's not questions that we're bringing forward are not aimed at you personally or anyone personally. It's really aimed at trying to make Caltrans effective and trying to be good stewards of the public dollar. Because in these very austere times, we need to make every dollar count. So with that said, I'd like to welcome the director, and please call you to the stage. And I also like to offer ranking member, Mr. Adams, a chance to say a few opening remarks if you'd like.
Just briefly, I appreciate being here. I especially appreciate those in the audience for their participation today, considering the lateness of the year and the proximity to the holiday. With that, I just want to thank the chair for his diligence and oversight, meeting the the touchstone for what we're trying to do here, and I look forward to this opportunity to spend time.
Thank you. And I've also been informed we may have another member join us who's not on the committee, but Mr. Jeffries may come. And I believe I mispronounced your name, Mr. Iwasaki. It's Iwasaki. Okay. And I want to make sure I get that correctly. Just to go over the issues that we're going to cover, we're going to first talk about the Bay Bridge, the I-beam failure, and focus on the adequacy of our bridge inspection programs, and talk about the S-curve issue as well. Then we're going to talk about the AASHTO conference, which is the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials, that took place in Palm Springs, and there's been a lot of media around that. Following that, we're going to take a look at the management of the department's fleet and how the efficacy of that. And then finally, we're going to talk about reviewing the status of the ARA funds, or the federal transportation money. This is something that I've been working on very heavily throughout the year, and want to make sure that we are 100% doing everything we can to position ourselves so we can take as much of the federal money as we possibly can. So starting off with the Bay Bridge. I'll set the stage real quickly, and then I'll turn it over to you to over Labor Day weekend, Caltrans discovered a crack in the I-beam on the east span of the Bay Bridge during a federally mandated inspection. And after that incident, Caltrans worked on a temporary repair of the crack by installing a structural brace that redistributed the load on the bridge. And the brace ultimately failed, and Caltrans is now working on a permanent solution. There's a lot of concerns about the cost. As I understand it, the initial repair was about $1.5 million. The second repair was about $6 million, and the permanent repair is going to, as I understand it, cost about $14 million. So with that, maybe we ought to start, and if I could ask you to, Director, to briefly walk us through the events surrounding the failure of the I-beam on the Bay Bridge.
Good afternoon, Chairman Bloomfield and Assemblymember Adams and staff. Is it okay if I read an opening statement?
Please.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to come to you and speak to you.
Is your mic? Could you test the mic? Yeah, or maybe you just need to move a little closer to the microphone. Can you hear me in the back?
Hello?
Okay. Okay, great.
As I said, good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation to come and speak to you about different issues facing the California Department of Transportation, or Caltrans. At a time when we are experiencing much needed help from the federal stimulus program, we find ourselves grappling with an aging infrastructure, uncertain project funding streams, and challenges to personnel resources, including furloughs and succession planning. Despite the challenges we face, Caltrans is still one of the leading creators of jobs in the state's economy, and we are working diligently to put stimulus money in the street as quickly as possible. This leadership role also means we ensure California's priorities are front and center in Washington, D.C. as federal legislators and the President put together the next transportation authorization bill. And it means we do all we can to recruit, cultivate, and retain the top human talent. Again, thank you for the invitation, and I will talk to you, or I'll answer your questions, or give you kind of a recap of the IBAR issue, if I may.
Please.
Okay. Well, in front of you, you should have some pictures, and so I'll kind of go through a recap. On my birthday, September the 3rd, we closed the Bay Bridge that Thursday evening to do a rollout of a 3,200-ton double-deck viaduct section of the San Francisco-Oakland Bay east span, and we rolled it 100 feet to the north. And what we did then is we rolled in a 3,700-ton double-deck truss section into the detour section. That process was planned to take the weekend and then up until Tuesday morning at 5 o'clock. And that portion went flawlessly on Labor Day weekend. And if that was the only job that we did that weekend, we would open that structure by 5 a.m. on Tuesday morning. However, during that process, we have a bridge inspection program that is mandated by the Federal Highway Administration. We call them FHWA. And FHWA requires us to inspect bridges on a 2-year cycle. And so this bridge was, it's 2 years since the previous full closure that we were able to inspect the entire structure. So we took advantage of the full closure. And so during our inspections, I think it was Saturday around noon, our inspectors on what I call the main span, the tall truss section of the east span, they found an eye-bar ruptured, which would be on one of your sheets of paper that looks like this. It says Testing and Inspection Eye-Bar Repair Fact Sheet. So in the middle right-hand portion of it, you can see where the crack of the eye-bar. So it's on the inside of an eye-bar chain. And so immediately our engineers began to go to work to try to figure out what happens is in this section there are 8 eye bars that make up, an eye bar is a bar, if you will, that has an eye on it that fits over a pin. And there are 8 eye bars in this section that create a structural member, and the eye bar is in tension, much like a bicycle chain. As you pedal your bicycle, that bicycle chain is in tension. It's got a pin hooking the links together. So the idea was to take the loss of the tension in that member and put it through a series of saddles and outriggers and tie rods, high-strength tie rods, take that stress and put it in those tie rods to kind of restore the geometry and the load pattern of that lost eye bar. And so that's what happened. We had the saddles and the pieces of metal fabricated in Arizona. We went to Avar and got the high-strength rods. We had the contractor install that repair, and we were able to open that structure at 6:30, about 6:30 in the morning on Tuesday. Subsequent to that repair, during the next few weeks, there was some wind events, and the bars began vibrating in the wind. It must have been the natural harmonics. And what happened is that you have a high-strength rod going through the saddle, the outriggers, and you have bearing plates and nuts on the end of it, and the tension. And so each of these rods are under tension. And so the wind causing the bars to vibrate allowed the bar to walk around in that hole, and it became embedded up against the bearing plate. This is what we think. And so once it fixed there, it's like taking a paper clip and bending it back and forth very quickly, and very quickly the metal fatigues and it shears. Once that tension was released, the saddle on top, the outrigger, rotated counterclockwise, broke the welds, and the system came down on the bridge deck. What looked like cables were the high-strength rods. So we shut the bridge down. Luckily, fortunately, nobody was seriously injured in the incident. And we brought in this time we brought in some experts from the outside, a professor from San Diego, UC San Diego, the Jacobs School of Engineering, the dean. We brought in a structural steel expert from the University of Nevada, Reno. And we had them review our idea for strengthening this repair system, if you will. And so what we did is we re-welded the system together, we put wind dampeners on the rods, and we put this temporary fix back on the bridge. In the meantime, what we looked for was a more permanent fix. There's really no permanent fix on this structure. What we're trying to do is restore the load pattern that the lost eye bar lost, the cracked eye bar lost. And we're trying to keep this bridge in service until we replace it 4 or 5 years from now.
Okay. Mr. Adams.
Just real quickly, I want to clarify a point there. You said you essentially insulated the rods. When you say the rods, do you mean that you've taken a precautionary method as it relates to all the rods on the bridge, or just the one in question?
Just this one right here, this one rod.
Is there, in your estimation, if the incident that occurred was a function of sort of the natural harmonics and a function of metal, what would essentially be traditional metal fatigue, what leads you to believe that that won't be a concern for the other rods that support the bridge, that you would therefore then take precautionary methods to protect?
Well, you're referring to an eye bar, right?
Right.
The eye bar itself. So the question is a good question. So what we do is now, after the initial incident of the fractured eye bar, is we went on a every 3 month inspection of the bridge, of the eye bar systems. And so rather than every 2 years, we're looking at the I-bars every 3 months because we had one fail.
Right.
And so we think we're trying to figure out, we've got a section of that rod of the I-bar removed, and we're sending it to a specialist to take a look at trying to figure out what exactly happened with that rod.
And you're still doing that investigation?
Yes.
And I mean, why did it take the first fix to fail? I mean, could it have been predicted that the first fix wouldn't have worked?
No, well, I guess the best way to answer that question is the fix is still in place. It's the vibration of the rods, high-strength rods that we were concerned with. We've dampened them with dampeners. Right. And so the bypassing using a saddle and an outrigger arrangement is still the right fix for that location.
I was just curious why, and it's perfectly fine not to predict all the, nobody can predict all the outcomes, but why didn't somebody think about the vibration issue and the dampening issue? Why did we have to sort of learn by trial and error on that?
They looked at it, they designed it based on the best engineering experts that we have. They did not anticipate that the rods would vibrate that much. They were concerned about it. They were trying to figure out how to dampen the vibration when the incident occurred. So now the system is set up where it has dampeners on each individual of the 4 rods that you see in that picture.
There was concern about the vibrations prior to the failure of the I-bar?
They looked at, they're always, see what happened is we start checking the repair weekly. I mean, we were looking at the repair because what we were trying to do is ultimately figure out how do we restore the I-bar itself.
No, I understand that, but and please feel free to correct my misunderstanding if that's in fact the case. But what I thought you just alleged was that your engineers were aware of the vibrations, were concerned about the high degree of vibrations that were occurring prior to the failure.
They were out inspecting the repair as well as the I-bars on a 3-month basis. They are always concerned about any deviation that occurs. If the bar is walking around in the hole, it concerns them. So they're looking at all aspects of that fix.
Prior to the failure, were they aware of a disproportionately high degree of vibration?
They noticed that the rods were moving, yes.
Have we, at this point, pinpointed the actual cause of the initial I-beam crack?
No, we've cut out a section, and we've sent that to a metallurgist, or what's the proper term for that? Metallurgist, right? Mm-hmm. And so he's taking a look at that. He's located in Santa Fe Springs down south.
And when do we expect to have some results from that?
Very soon, hopefully. We're waiting for that information.
How long has the metallurgist, I can't pronounce, been evaluating this?
It's been about a month so far, and I think we're expecting some preliminary results here this month. And I think in a letter we sent some Q&As over to some of the members. We'd indicated by January we feel comfortable that post-incident review report will be available for distribution among those interested legislators.
But obviously that could have wide implications for all of the similar bridges, correct? I mean, depending on what the reasons were?
There are really no similar bridges to the East Span. But yes.
Aren't there 55 bridges that have a similar I-beam? It's my understanding it's designed just like the Bay Bridge, or is this unique?
We have 4 bridges with I-bars in the trusses or in the bridges that the state owns. There are 52 bridges on the local system that have I-bars in them. One of the 52 is no longer in service, but it still stands. And there's different applications for I-bars in all those bridges. So, there's some in Anchor. I mean, there's a...
But all of those bridges, it's the state's responsibility to inspect, all 55.
All fracture critical structures in California, the state takes responsibility. Local bridges we inspect except for Santa Clara County and Los Angeles County.
So the big question is, should we be concerned about the other 54 bridges that have the similar I-beam, I-bar, that are being inspected? I know most of them are locally responsible, but I don't want to create panic in the streets, but I mean, what should be people's legitimate level of concern about similar bridges of similar age? Because these bridges are all were created around the same time, right?
Yeah, an I-bar. I guess the answer to your question is we inspect the structures on a 2-year cycle. If we see anything that concerns us, in this case, like the Bay Bridge, My point to the media at the time was, if we had found this in a normal inspection program and we didn't have the bridge shut down, we would have shut the bridge down because we're concerned about traveler safety. And that's the call that the bridge inspectors make.
You say this. What is this? Because you already indicated that your engineers were aware of a disproportionately high vibration. So you clearly had some cause, not necessarily for alarm, but at least for concern that something seemed out of the ordinary. So what is the this that would preclude, or excuse me, precede an engineer actually asking for the bridge to be closed?
I'm trying to address Chairman Blumenfield's question about I-bar systems and the concern about that. My point is that if we have a concern about any structure in California and the structural integrity of that structure, and we inspect these bridges on a 2-year cycle, if we find something wrong, we'll shut that bridge down and make the necessary repairs before we open up to make sure it's safe as possible.
Oh, I understand. I guess my concern, and building on Chair Blumenfield's concern, we don't have the report back from the metallurgist, and you're not entirely sure what it was that caused the structural failure. And if that in fact is the case, then it does beg the question, how can you be assured that a similar thing wouldn't occur in one of the other bridges? And more directly, if in fact the one indicator you had that there was something out of the ordinary was the high degree of vibration, is that occurring in other bridges that, in your estimation or in your analysis of through these 2-year studies?
You're mixing the causes of failure up. The vibration is in a tie rod that was on the repair. The I-bar is fixed to the existing structure.
So the vibrations of the rods were a function of the sort of the repair or the temporary fix. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, understood.
So that's the question. I think is with other bridges with I-bars in the bridge, how do we make sure that they're safe for the traveling public?
Understood. And you said you submitted the report last month. We expected to have something in January, correct?
That's to figure out what are the causes.
What structurally went wrong with the metal, correct?
Right.
Right.
Whether it was a fatigue crack, was it vibrations, did the bar lock up? And we don't know, so we're trying to figure that out.
And just to follow, why did we just submit the metal to the metallurgist now? Shouldn't we have done that like the day after the bridge failed? I mean, was there a delay in that, or did it happen quickly?
Well, the first order of work was to restore the load path, so you can't have somebody up there cutting away on the structure till you put the repair into place. We were trying to figure out how do we extract the metal. Do we drill it out? How are we going to cut that metal out? During that process, as we were getting a consultant on board, during that time frame, my understanding is then that we had the failure.
You have 12,000 engineers. You needed a consultant to do what?
We're not skilled. We don't have experts on staff to figure out forensics on metal.
Of the 12,000 engineers you have, nobody has an expertise on the metal that supports the bridges that Caltrans is responsible for?
Not for our forensics, no. No, what we do is we'll test, like for example, in order to make the permanent repair on the structure, we went out and we scoured the place that supplied ductile or fracture critical steel, 50 KSI fracture critical steel, because it's a special steel. When we found that, our people at METS, our material testing area, tested for, is it got the same characteristics as the existing fracture critical metal that is used to construct the I-bar. But we don't have anybody on staff because that person wouldn't be busy very often because there's not a lot of call for that. So that's something that we contract out to somebody that does that for a living all the time.
I think that's an excellent point, Director. So my next question for you would be then, did you already have somebody that you had a pre-existing relationship with to go to work, or did you have to go out to RFP to find a contractor to do the forensics work?
Well,
I guess what I'm asking is, I'd like to know that, like the chair alluded to, that the moment that you had the opportunity to recapture some of the metal in a way that didn't do increased harm, that you were able to get this to the appropriate metallurgist for their analysis to begin. I am frankly concerned that the amount of time it seems to be taking to determine, the nature of it, now fundamentally not understanding the work that the metallurgist has to do, I'm cognizant of that and would be willing to have that explained to me, but it does seem like a disproportionately long amount of time to have to wait if potentially other structures are at threat. But my question to you specifically is, did you already have somebody that you had contracted with, or Caltrans has, such that you could immediately send somebody, or did you have to begin the process like an RFP or any other type of procurement process for forensics consultation?
I will say I don't know, only because I don't know for a fact, but I would say that with the speed that we brought and sent the metal down south, we did not have to go out through the RFP process. But I'll double check that. That's a great question. But within a month, we have the metal cut out. We've got it sent down to Santa Fe. Normally, it takes a lot longer to go through the RFP process than that. So I would imagine, and do you know that for a fact? Do we have a?
It was not an RFP process. It was a direct.
This is pretty important. I mean, the structural integrity of our structures is very important to Caltrans. You, as a traveling public, generally don't realize you're on a structure. You just take that for granted. And so our bridge inspectors are trained to make a decision when they see something that's wrong. If it's going to harm somebody, they shut that structure down. And that was my point initially, is that we had the bridge closed anyway. So from that perspective, we were able to do these repairs and not really adversely impact the mobility of the great state of California in that location. It did take us a little bit longer to open that structure.
And by the way, I appreciate that and the fact that you are committed to acting quickly anytime there is an issue, and that's very important to be reassured of, and I have great confidence in that. Curious, though, if we have sped up the inspections on the other bridges since this incident, or are they still on a rotating 2-year cycle?
What we've done is, for the local structures, we've gathered all the latest inspection criteria, and we're getting in touch with the local agencies as soon as we can. That's the 52 locally owned, except for the one that's no longer in service. The 4 bridges, I think we've submitted some information on the inspection program for those structures. We still do the bridges on a 2-year cycle.
Do you think that should be expedited faster than a 2-year cycle? 1 year, a 6-month cycle, given the situation that we have?
No, not in my professional judgment, based on Barton Newton, who's our office chief for the Structures Material Investigation. The 2-year cycle is good for that type of inspection. The point is, do it every 2 years, which we are. Make corrections when necessary. Look for anomalies where you can find them, so we don't have a fractured eye bar in the future. What we do is we catch it when it's just a flaw on an eye bar, and you can deal with it in different ways and wait until it cracks, and then have to go to a hearing and explain how you do all these kind of good things. So we're committed to our bridge inspection program. We're doing everything we can to inspect those structures. We're working with our partners. Their bridges are just important to us as our bridges, because they're all one state. And so we're doing everything we can to get the information in the hands of local agencies. Our 3 other bridges are inspected, and they have an inspection cycle: the Richmond-San Rafael, the West Span, and then the Shasta River Bridge.
I mean, I'm glad that in your judgment it doesn't take that, and that goes a lot. I'm still, just as a layperson, I'm very concerned about that, and I'm worried also that the furlough schedule may be impacting the ability to inspect properly. Do you see any relationship there?
No, what we're doing is when the furlough program was enacted, the executive order allowed us to apply for an exemption to the executive order, which we applied for different parts of what we do, but including the bridge inspection program. And we got an approval from our agency to put our bridge inspectors on what we call self-directed extended. And so they don't take the Fridays off. They're not like we shut our doors down at 1120 N Street the first Friday.
But they're still furloughed, even though they basically do self-direct. This is something, maybe you can explain it to me. It just, at least the way I understand it or misunderstand it, I sort of sometimes want to pull my hair out. The federal government pays for the inspectors, right? I mean, there's a program that pays for it. And yet we furlough those inspectors, even though it doesn't cost us an extra dime of state money. And then over the course of the week, because we actually need them, they go on this self-directed plan where they're working all 5 days of the week, but they're going to take this time off at some other time. So they end up then getting time and a half as overtime in certain situations. Is that true? And then and then it makes you wonder, why are we furloughing them in the first place when it's not even state money that's being used for them?
When they're on the self-directed extended program, they work 5 days a week at straight time. When they work 8 hours. If they're supervisorial or above, then they don't qualify for overtime. If they're rank and file and they do qualify for overtime and they work more than 40 hours a week, we pay them. We pay them overtime. So I mean, that's normal practice.
Saying but they're working only 40 hours a week, even though they're on. So they're not really furloughed.
They are furloughed. They are participating on the furlough program, but they don't take the first 3 Fridays of the month off like some of us. I don't, but our team does. Back at 1120 N Street, for example, we shut the doors the first 3 Fridays of the month. That's it. So they take the day off. They don't accrue a furlough day for use in the future. In the case of when you get an exemption to that program, the furlough program, then they work 5 days a week to get the job done. So in the future, let's say I'm a bridge inspector. Next Friday I want to take off, and my supervisor says it's okay. I'm not going to use vacation. I'm going to use a furlough day.
Okay. Do you have additional questions?
No, but it's a point worth reiterating. We're not paying for it. The federal government is paying for it. Why are they furloughed at all? Why are they getting time? Why are they getting time off that we're paying for? If in fact it's a great point, and maybe it's not a question you can answer, but I don't care. I'm put out in the universe like that, so that the administration has to come to answer it as well, because it doesn't make any sense that we're paying for people to take time off when the federal government is the one picking up the tab for it, and we are supposed to be furloughing to save state resources. So without need for you to direct a comment to that, I just want to make the point.
All right. And I guess the reason why I was relating it to overtime is if they never cash in those extra days of furlough time, and they're actually needed down the road for those days, which I assume that they are. So you come to the end of the year and they're needed for those days, then the only way that they can work is by being paid overtime. Isn't that right, or am I misunderstanding it?
My understanding of the furlough program is once you're on a self-directed and you work a straight 40-hour week, you're not the fifth Friday or the Friday. It's not overtime. It's straight time. You're accruing, and maybe Cindy, is that right? I'm not.
The time off for
Yeah, so the way I explained it, I think, is right. You work 40 hours a week, you get straight time unless you work more than 8 and you're qualified for cash overtime. What you do is you accrue that instead of you work that furlough day, so you gain 8 hours of furlough time that you're going to take off at a future time.
Right. But if you're needed in that, so you accrue an extra 2 weeks of time, and then but we're still down inspectors, and you need to I don't want to belabor this too long, but but you need you actually need these inspectors, and then you're up against them having the time or not having the time.
We don't believe that the furloughs are impacting safety. Most of these employees will be taking their furlough days sometime in the future. They're not taking it off necessarily that week, that month. So the inspections are still continuing, and there is no impact on safety.
Okay. I do want to get through to all of the topics. So are there any other questions on the I-beam? I guess the other issue is before we... Good. I mean, that's a good question.
I'd like to know when we will actually see the report as well. You said January. You have a more date specific, or have you been...
Right, and as the consultant's been working, he's been providing preliminary data to our folks as they prepared this long-term repair, which we're in, and perhaps the director can touch on before we leave the subject. Right now we're in the long-term repair portion of this issue. I think the expectation is by the end of the year we should have that basic draft report back from the consultant. And in our letter we had provided to some of the Bay Area members and policy and budget staff, we'd I think built in a buffer of January, but hopefully by year's end that report should be ready and available for review.
The report, is that just going to simply be a metallurgist analysis of what structurally went wrong, or is that report also going to include a recommendation from the department about how to address potential harm, or whether there is no actual threat, this was a unique or an abnormal circumstance?
That's a great question. What the forensics will tell us is how to better inspect the other eye bars. So if, for example, if this crack started from the outside of the bar and worked in, then we step up, taking a look at the outside of that eye, if you will, the round portion of that bar. If it started from the inside, from the pin out, then we've got to figure out, what caused that. Was it a lockup? I mean, what was the anomaly, or what was the flaw that created that crack? Did it come inside? Did it come out? And so we're waiting for the results of this so we can adjust our inspection program to be more efficient, to get to your question, Chairman, that, how do we make this safer? So we'll just go, if it's outside in, then we'll start beginning inspecting with dye penetrant all the way around these eye bars, and we'll check it out. If it's inside out, then we're going to have to figure out and run a bore scope in there, or however we do it. But we'll modify our inspection program to make it more effective, more efficient.
Okay. Before we get to the public testimony of this section, we'll do public testimony of each issue as we go. I did want to briefly talk about the S-curve issue related to the bridge here. On Labor Day weekend, Caltrans installed an S-curve detour on the east span of the bridge to allow work to proceed. Following the installation of the detour, the department reported a high incidence of crashes, including a fatality. But then the department worked with CHP and did a number of things to reduce those accidents. And as I understand it, there's been a precipitous drop in accidents, and should be commended for that, for helping to do that. But I wanted you to quickly walk us through what happened there. Was it handled properly or improperly, and where are we now on that?
Okay, well, in your package you have a kind of a red-looking picture, and this is the S-curve, if you will, and it's a straight section of roadway with two curves on either end. And what it does is it the self-anchored suspension portion of the new Bay Bridge, east span of the Bay Bridge, is going to go in the same footprint as where the bridge used to be. And so in order to get it ready to attach the double-deck tunnel at Yerba Buena Island, we have to clear a space. And so really what this S-curve does is it pulls traffic out of the tunnel, gets them over to the right, away from where the new bridge is going to be positioned, and run them on the straight section and back onto the old structure. So it's basically a detour. The term is S because I guess it kind of does look like an S. And so what happened is the S-curve is designed, the detour is designed for a 40 mile an hour speed limit, design speed. And so advisory signs were up 35 miles an hour. The speed limit of the Bay Bridge overall is 50 miles an hour. This one section is 40. And so this is the Labor Day roll out the bridge, roll in the detour, just a fantastic engineering feat. If you ever have a chance, take a look at our website. It's pretty slick. And we noticed a large number of accidents, people that are going too fast, losing control. So you see a lot of speed-related, if not all the accidents, speed-related accidents. And so we began working with the California Highway Patrol to try to slow traffic down. So we put advisory signs up. If you go there today, I was there yesterday, you've got changeable message signs, lane slow, you got radar feedback signs telling the traveling public you're going 45 miles an hour, the speed limit is 40. We ended up during off-peak hours, during peak hours you don't, because traffic is so slow, you can't go 40 miles an hour anyway. You can only go 15 or 20, so it's just self-regulating. But as the off-peak hours speeds start rising, people are going faster than 40 miles an hour, or they go 50, whatever the speed is above 40, and they have problems. And so what we did is we asked the California Highway Patrol, we began taking a lane, because on the structure you have 5 lanes and no shoulder. And what we're trying to do with the new bridge is build 5 lanes with 10-foot inside-outside shoulders, so you'll have refuge areas, and it's going to be a lot nicer. So we took a lane to reduce capacity, but more importantly, allow a place for the California Highway Patrol to reside, to run radar, and then have an officer there so they can pull the people over to remind them to slow down. And just the California Highway Patrol's presence on a roadway generally tends to bring the speeds down to the speed limit. And so that's what we found. And so I believe we had over 50 accidents prior to doing these aggressive actions, after, for the last, maybe the same time period.
7.
Yeah.
Pardon?
7.
What do you mean 7?
7 accidents.
Oh, we've had 7 accidents since then.
So it's great that we've lowered the accidents. The one question I would have is could this have been predicted, and could we have avoided the fatalities and the 50 accidents that started out?
We did everything we could to tell folks to slow down. 40-mile-an-hour speed limit. But what happens is when you have an unconstrained roadway, sometimes folks tend to go a little faster because they're in a rush. And so what we try to do is remind everybody to go the speed limit. I think ultimately now the average speed has dropped even without the Highway Patrol's presence, but there's more media outreach. I mean, during the opening we talked about slow down. In our advertisements, we've said keep your speed down in the S-curve, and I'm working with the California Trucking Association to remind truckers to slow down. So we're doing everything we can to get the word out, and we have a more positive kind of an impact when we bring the California Highway Patrol with us.
Right. Yeah. So it's always great to bring the CHP.
Right.
Unless there's another question, I'd like to move to public comment on this section, and then we'll move to the next issue. Is there any members of the public who would like to speak on this issue? Let's see, we have one. And if you could just announce your name and affiliation.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Brewer with SEIU Local 1000. I just want to make a clarification on the furlough issue. Even when employees work in a federal program that's funded with federal funds and they're on self-directed furlough, they're still getting about a 15% pay cut even if they're working 5 days a week. So they may be working 5 days a week, but they're getting paid less. So, and they may have those furlough days to use later in the future, but they do have a it's in 2012, they have a deadline, and if they don't use those, then they lose those. So they may be working 5 days a week, but they're still not getting paid for their work. So just clarification. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that. I think that's an important point, and it sort of begs the question of why on earth are we furloughing people that are not being paid with state funds? To me that boggles my mind that we have the discretion to just pay them for the 5 days a week out of federal funds, and we are instead just sweeping them in with the whole furlough issue. But that's a bigger issue, and it's not just at Caltrans, it's at a number of different agencies. But are there any other public comments? Then let's move to the next issue. The next issue has seen a lot of media attention. It's the department hosted the annual AASHTO conference in Palm Springs this year. This conference is attended by state and federal transportation executive officers nationwide and focuses on topics related to national transportation policy funding. The department sent 52 staff members, 11 of whom were delegates, with the rest providing support for the meetings. And what we need to do is really hear how the benefits of holding this conference at a four-star resort balance out with the state dollars and the time that it took to put it together. I'm very interested in what the director is going to say about this. And the main issue here, I mean, there's probably some justification. I want to hear that. It's, in my mind, there's when we're dealing with the public funds, there's both the realities and there's the perceptions. And one of the things that concerns me greatly is I look at the advertisement for the hotel where the resort was, and it says, "Live life large at Desert Springs." And I look at this with the in the Palm Desert with the water and the golf courses. I mean, it looks like an amazing place that everyone would love to go to. And even if it turns out it was an effective use of money, it still will really rub taxpayers the wrong way. And and as you hear about it, anyone who hears just a little bit or hears a snippet on the news is going to be infuriated thinking about our tax dollars going, having people live life large at the taxpayer's expense, which is obviously something both real and perceived. We never want to have that image with the state of California. We want people to be feeling good about the funds that are being spent, knowing that their bridges are being repaired and inspected, and not feeling as if money is being wasted. It's also the timing of this, of course, was not very good because it was right after the I-beam had been noticed, the problems had been realized, and so it also sort of begs the question of, well, shouldn't we have been focusing all our resources on those kinds of things and not on this kind of conference? But what I'd like to do is give you an opportunity to talk about this a little bit, and then we'll ask some questions.
Thank you for allowing me to talk a little bit about the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials annual meeting. We applied to host the annual meeting 3 years ago,
Okay. And by the way, I realize that this whole thing happened before your time. This thing had been applied for and was rolling, and in many ways it's difficult to expect someone coming in to see every moving piece, and folks had already been almost out the door by the time you were there. So I recognize that, but please continue.
I appreciate that, but I'm not here to deflect the blame from me because I'm the director. So if there's blame, it's my fault. But I'm trying to give you a historical perspective of this conference. The last time California hosted this conference was in 1973. 3 years ago, we applied competition at Honolulu, I think Dallas, Texas, and there was another state. We ultimately were awarded the opportunity, the state was, to have the AASHTO conference in California. We were pretty excited about that. The economy was fairly good then. It started downturning, and we became concerned about the number of staff people that we would have to bring over to Palm Desert in order to staff the conference. And it's a very good conference from a technical perspective. You know, you are with the other 49 states and District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, and it's all transportation experts talking about the items that they're really into: climate change, design, construction, accelerated construction, etc. So 3 years ago we apply, we get it. Economy's turning down. If we took a look back in Hartford, Connecticut, where the previous event was held, 200 state employees supported that conference. The prior year, because we looked back there as well as Wisconsin, and Wisconsin had about 125 state employees. But the economy just kept getting worse, and so we tried to figure out a way of not making it all about where Caltrans employees had to staff the conference, because there is a benefit to that, because then they're in the same conference rooms as everybody else, learning and listening to those experts talk when they would normally not get an opportunity to be there and listen to that firsthand. But in our case, what we ended up with is 52 people went to the event, and 11 were delegates, including myself, and 17 supported what we call the Innovative Mobility Showcase. And the Innovative Mobility Showcase was designed to expose the other 49 states, Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia, to some of the technologies that are developed and available from California. So we had worker protection devices, accelerated construction technology, software. We had a Tesla car from California. We had an electric fueling facility, if you will, solar panels. The companies here, Sun, they manufacture the components here. There was just a lot of technology, so there were 17 folks, if my memory serves me correctly, and then the remainder, about 24, supported the conference. And so, but in our case, what happened is we ended up partnering with the private sector, and we went out to Palm Desert's convention or their chamber and said, hey, do you have any retired folks or anybody that would help work with us in order to defray the number, lower the number of state employees, but help us make sure that this conference is pulled off properly. And so the private sector came in and hadn't done before. So in this case, the conference in an area that has a high unemployment rate, if my memory serves me correctly, but we had over 2,000, a little over 2,000 rooms reserved. There was a little more than that were ultimately lived in. In our case, the state employees got an $84 room rate. So I guess the difference is we can stay at Motel 6 for $84, or we can stay at this hotel for $84. It didn't matter. It was the same rate. So we negotiated that. I think it had to do with the downturn in the economy as well. So $500,000 was generated directly by room rate, you know, the payments that people make for their rooms. And then this is an art calculator, but the Travel and Tourism Commission, it's for 800, ultimately it was 800. They thought 600 people were going to register. There was 800 registrants, and they generated about $1.1 million. And that doesn't include if they brought somebody else and those kinds of things that work.
I just want to stop you for a moment. I mean, I appreciate what you're saying. I'd like to sort of keep the discussion about this sort of to Caltrans role. I mean, the results of putting on any sort of, you know, conference is going to help the economy of the area that you do it. But we're talking about, you know, Caltrans dollars are not intended to, you know, to bolster an economy of a particular area. This is, and the Caltrans dollars are supposed to be, I mean, and the purpose of the conference wasn't for economic development of Palm Springs. It was for for getting transportation dollars. So I think that you're making a point that there are some justifications from a transport, but that's kind of where I want to go with it. I'm much less interested in the economic development arguments for the area, because I think it's not appropriate for us to be thinking about as we decide how to spend Caltrans dollars in conferences.
Okay, so then we had 52 people show up, 11 delegates that attended there on various committees, technical committees, the executive committee, you have the standing committee on highways, which adopts the design criteria for the nation. It's got an AASHTO design manual. It's we call it the Green Book, and so any modifications are voted on by the AASHTO members. And our employees were there because they could actually be exposed to some of this new technology, and so really that was their role. Their role was not only to support the conference, but to learn what they saw and hopefully go back and train others. This is a great training opportunity for our employees that they wouldn't normally have an opportunity to have, because if you had a national meeting somewhere else, we'd send about 5 people: the director, the chief engineer, the federal person, the AASHTO coordinator, and then some other person at whatever subcommittee that is meetings that we need to send, about 5. So we did send more than 5, but it was a golden opportunity to provide training for the future leaders of this department, not from a managerial perspective of whether it's a good idea to send employees to this conference, but more from a technical perspective.
And the ability to get federal funds.
And you're sitting next to Victor Mendez, who is the Federal Highway Administrator. You have Polly Trottenberg, the Deputy Secretary for Policy, Peter Rogoff, the the Administrator for the Federal Transit Agency. And we're in a time when the Safety Lou bill lapsed. We're in a month-to-month federal extension. It's causing havoc with our Chief Financial Officer. And you have the opportunity to on the next Surface Transportation Authorization Act, and we're not hanging our hat on that's going to be the save-all and those kinds of things, but ultimately we want more of a performance-based program in the future so that California can get more money based on performance criteria. And so that's very important to us.
And was this considered a sort of a perk for the folks? Because it seemed a little strange to have folks who are being paid $100,000 a year be support staff, shuttling people around is what was alleged in the news media. And so was it considered a perk? So you have them do some shuttle driving, but it's also sort of a good way to get folks something positive. And was that part of it?
I'm not sure the perk is the correct way to put that. I mean, it's my first experience traveling out of state was I took notes, and that's really not a perk. I think in this case, because you are at a higher level, you don't qualify for overtime. You're working on Saturday and Sunday, so you don't technically get paid for work on Saturday or overtime on Saturday and Sunday. And those folks that are high level ended up they took furlough days. And so there was a minimal impact, if you will, to the budget. That was your concern from a salary perspective. So would we do it again? Maybe not. Definitely have less people there. But we don't choose where the conferences are held. That's what AASHTO does. We're there because we agreed to host it to support that effort as best we could. And if you look at the other states' performance, which we're not saying, hey, they did it wrong or they did it right, we try to minimize our impact, but get an opportunity for our employees to get exposed to some of the more technical aspects of what AASHTO has to offer. And that is a golden opportunity for them.
Just run through the numbers real quick with you again. On average, we sent how many people compared to states before us?
We sent 52. Last year at Hartsford, Connecticut, they had around 200 state employees, it's my understanding. And then the previous year in Wisconsin, I think it was. 150. About 125.
Seems to me like more than anything else, this was a function of horrifically bad timing, but outside of your control. I think you did the best you could.
Thank you.
And it's really it's the perception issue, and we have, you live life large as the perception, and $80,000, while in the Caltrans budget may not seem like a lot, it's enough to restore, SSI to 3,200 elderly folks. You think about $80,000 and how many children could be immunized for that. I mean, it's a lot of money. I mean, in terms of how much was actually spent when you add it all up. And it's a timing question, and it's sort of, it's being able to, the public and being aware of the way the public will perceive these things question. And so I'm glad to hear you say that, you wouldn't do it again in this kind of economy, because it's really, at this point in time, it's about the economy that we're in. I mean, we are just making horrible cuts, and I was on the Budget Conference Committee, and every one is painful, and it feels like making Sophie's Choice every day. And so when you're in that kind of an environment, even if it's only $80 a day, to see folks with the tax dollars that should be going to these services, living life large, can be infuriating to me and to the public. So, I mean, the key is, how are we going to prevent this kind of thing from happening in the future and keep, have you thought about how you're going to revise procedures in the future for these kinds of conferences? I know that there was a memo, that the governor had a memo prior to this saying no travel, that we had to get a special exemption for this, correct?
You're talking about Will Kempton?
Yes. It was a Will. I thought it was the governor's, but it was the former director.
Yeah, we are doing everything we can to question and look at all conferences. We've asked all of our deputy directors to take a look at that, and we are weighing basically doing a benefit cost ratio and analysis to figure out, is it worth going, and what is our role? If we have a role, let's go, but bring that information back to Caltrans and make some change for the better of transportation.
How do we, in that cost benefit issue, which you're doing, and I appreciate that you're doing it, how do we ensure that that the sensitivity to the economy is a factor now more, because the cost benefit analysis in a flush time may be the same in the austere time, because there's been other issues. I mean, there's the whole go-kart issue, and where maybe it made sense from a business perspective to have folks on a leadership training going on go-karts, but again, it's the kind of thing that public sees and they are livid. So how do you assure me and assure the committee and the public that the sensitivity to this kind of thing will be greater in the future?
I am personally looking at it, or my chief deputy director is looking at every conference that we come across, and we've that looks at the amount of attendees, and we're limiting it to one, if any, or where it makes more sense, we send more people. But we're looking at it from a perspective of not only what it costs, is somebody else paying the travel, how are we integrating it? Are they a chairperson of that committee? What are we going to bring home? I mean, there's a lot of factors in travel to conferences and workshops, but we're trying to analyze it from that perspective. And I would say that we're doing everything we can to apply a different look to conferences and attendance than we did before. You have my word on that.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate that, and I'm confident that we'll work together on that and make sure that happens, and we restore the public's trust in our operations. Are there any other comments on this issue? If not, are there any public testimony on this issue? Yes, sir. Someone come in. Please.
And Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Bruce Blanning, Executive Director with Professional Engineers in California Government, or PEG, and just a brief statement about the Astro Conference. We were a sponsor, among many others that sponsored events at the Astro Conference, because we believe in it, and we thought it was a privilege for California to get the conference here. One of the many issues they discuss at a conference like this, and it is a big deal in the transportation industry. It's a once a year. As Randy said, all of the transportation directors around the country and others, and many of the top federal officials, come to the conference, and they talk about how they're going to get more federal money for infrastructure. That's an economic issue. I mean, transportation is about relieving congestion, but it's also about creating jobs. For $1 billion of transportation money, you create 30,000 jobs. No other way to create that many jobs out of $1 billion. So it does create jobs for California or elsewhere. And while there is a difference between reality and perception, and it is a difficult time to be attending conferences, we would just be concerned if in the future, because of a concern about tens of thousands of dollars being spent on an event, Caltrans in California is not a player when federal money is determined as to how much is going to go to infrastructure and how much is going to go to California. If California is not only not a leader, but not a participant in that decision, other states will be glad to take California's share of the money, and all the thousands of jobs and the relief of traffic congestion could occur from that. Not that this one event makes that happen, but it is a very important event in the transportation arena. And it is one that is worth, I would think, explaining to the public why it's important to them, but in a time of high unemployment and in a time of recession, to try to get not only the federal money coming to California and being sure that we're taking care of the Californians in that regard, but also, as the comment was made, Tesla Motors and others, it was a chance to showcase California businesses because the conference was held here in California. So while it is a difficult time, I'd be a little cautious about saying we're not going to do this in the future, we're going to pull back because of the public perception. Maybe the public perception, we should make an effort to try to change that so they understand why these things are being done. Also at the conference, we paid $84 for our room, not with the state, but we got that rate too. A very nice hotel, $84 is also a very nice rate. And I know some of the Caltrans people who were working there, and they were working. That was a perk. That's not how they wanted to spend their weekend otherwise. They worked hard to make the conference go. As Randy said, we had a very small number, they had a very small number of employees there, and they were pretty busy, as were our folks in trying to be a sponsor. So just my thought is a very worthwhile event, and that perhaps could be explained better so that the public won't get the idea it was a boondoggle or a vacation or paradise. It was a worthwhile event.
Appreciate that. And again, it's jobs are incredibly important. Getting the federal money is incredibly important, and keeping the public perception, as you said, clear is important. So we'll move on. Unless there are other testimony, we'll move on to the next issue, which is fleet management. Taking a step back, the broad image we are getting on the outside is that Caltrans is sometimes a little bit schizophrenic when it comes to fleet management. I want to kind of explore that because you've frozen new transportation projects for the state, but recently have purchased over 2,600 new vehicles over the last 2 years. You're being forced to cut the fleet on the one hand by 15% by the governor, but again increasing the fleet on the other hand with the 2,600 new vehicles. So going specific, the vehicle reduction, there are certain vehicles that have been scheduled to be reduced over the next couple of years or have been reduced, but we've been purchasing vehicles, 600 new passenger vehicles before the governor called for fleet reduction. It just sometimes seems like we're on this auto consumption mode, and I really want to look into this issue. I know you have a lot of experience with fleet management and get a sense of how these decisions are being made. Is it a question of the right hand giving and the left hand taking away? What's the rationality here?
Let's see the best way to answer that, because it's phrased a little bit differently than what I was expecting it to be phrased. I guess the best way to answer that question is the majority of our existing fleet is used for maintenance purposes, from a snowplow to a cargo truck to some of the four-wheel drive sedans. So a majority of the 13,000 plus pieces of equipment are in the maintenance arena. There are some of those vehicles that we use to support the capital program, and that's, I think, where you're headed, Chairperson Bloomfield, is that as the program shrinks, because currently we have about almost $10 billion of work in construction still. I mean, it's been at $10 billion. We've got projects on the shelf ready to go to construction if we can get bond sales and you can help us out in the budget and things like that. But how we deal with this reduction in the fleet is you're really biting off a lot of those vehicles, or potentially biting off some of those vehicles, reducing them, that do support. So number one is we do not want to reduce our fleet, if we can, to plow snow. We just had a snow conference with a majority of the snow owners, the snow resort owners, and they love the way we plow snow. In fact, they want bigger, better snow plows, which cost more money, which means that we only have a replacement budget of X, and therefore we buy less vehicles as they go up in value. We're not connected to an inflationary perspective. More specifically, to answer your question about the reduction in the program, is what we've done in the past years is as we contract out the construction inspection, the inspector comes with a truck or a vehicle. As it downturns, and because we use consultants as a springboard, as we reduce the amount of consultants, they take their vehicles with them. But we also, for our own staff, because they're not going to walk, and we don't want them so what we do is we're starting to lease more vehicles. And so we use a leasing program so that when the project's done, Randy Iwasaki doesn't go to another project. We turn in the lease vehicle, and I go back to design or wherever else I'm going as an engineer. And so that's kind of, in a nutshell, how we deal with your issue.
So the overall fleet has been reduced, right, by 15%?
We've been working on a fleet reduction at Caltrans for a long time, but
right.
we're trying now to reduce the fleet to a certain level. I'm not sure we've hit 15%.
It's light duty vehicle.
Pardon?
Light duty only.
Oh, yeah, that's right. It deals with light duties. Thanks.
Not the heavy duty ones that are
Okay.
I mean, I guess, the question when you see the numbers going up and is the goal should be, I would imagine, to reduce the cost by 15%, not necessarily the number of vehicles, because in some ways, it doesn't matter how many vehicles you have as long as they cost less. So I guess one of the things I was grappling with is trying to understand if you're buying, you're selling 2 vehicles here and you're buying a new one. Why don't you just use the 2 that you have a little longer, wait till one of them breaks down, and keep a larger fleet of older vehicles rather than...
It's a great point. Just like your own vehicle, what happens is we have criteria, age and miles. As the light fleet ages, the maintenance requirements get greater. And so then what we have to do is we have to do more maintenance. So you're going to pay either buying a new vehicle or you're going to pay for the maintenance costs. And so you have to balance that. And so we've come up with numbers over the years to define the criteria for replacement of a vehicle. And many times you're driving that vehicle longer than the criteria is set to replace it, because the replacement budget, as I mentioned before, is fixed.
Okay, so you're doing the cost-benefit analysis in that regard, and great. I mean,
exactly.
That's what we want to hear. And then there's also been reports that some of these vehicles are sitting around for a couple of years. Is that, I mean, how long does a new vehicle typically sit around before it is put into use?
Well, the media reported that these vehicles some vehicles have been sitting out, and technically they're vehicles, but they're not really a completed vehicle yet. And so, have you given them a picture? So what we end up doing is we end up getting a vehicle that looks like this. And so this would be a stake bed truck, more than likely, it looks like, or maybe a plow. And so we'll see on the next page. But so what we do is we put the tailgate, the dump body, or whatever is going to go on the back end. We put all the appurtenances, the light bars, the striping, the insignias, the fender wells. All those things get manufactured. So we'll do a run of, let's say, 100. We manufacture about 350 to 500 trucks a year. And so the 2 that were in question, the 2006 vehicles, were tow trucks. And so what we were doing is we were racing with this assembly line, trying to meet a December 31st, 2009 clean air requirement. And so we didn't want to break down an assembly line, because if you don't meet that criteria, you get fined $1,000 per day per vehicle. And so what we were doing is we were building a run of trucks, and so ultimately it ends up looking like this, which is a lot different than what we purchased. And this is what we purchased. And so we actually were, what do you call it, an end product manufacturer?
Final stage.
Huh?
Final stage.
Sorry, complete vehicle. So we're certified to manufacture these trucks, and that's we resolved the problem. We resolved the problem. We're going to get those 2 tow trucks built, and they're going to be on the road because we do all the towing in the Bay Area on the toll bridges.
Has there been an issue with maintenance? Like I've heard also that part of the furloughs are affecting the ability to maintain these vehicles. Is that one of the core issues here as well?
Well, this isn't the maintenance piece. This is the building piece.
Or even a building piece? Do the furloughs impact your ability to do that?
I don't know if we're on. Are we on standard?
We put our crews on just that.
Self-directed.
This is Mike Miles. He's the Deputy Director for Maintenance and Operations.
We've put our equipment mechanics, excuse me, we've put our equipment mechanics on mandatory overtime. We're working them 10 hours a day, and they're working on the furlough Fridays, and they're banking the furlough hours.
So explain that to me. They're being furloughed, but they're on overtime?
Well, they work 10 hours a day in order to meet the air quality mandates, and then they're working on that furlough Friday on a bank on that day. They don't get paid overtime on that furlough Friday.
So they're either going to then end up eating that at the end of the year, as we had the SIU person telling us, or they're going to have to...
They'll have to take those hours at some time in the future.
Does that make any sense to you?
The furloughs?
Well, in this situation...
I think what Mike is trying to say, maybe phrase it a little bit differently, he has put because of this mandate to retrofit or buy new vehicles that meet the clean air criteria by December 31st of 2009, he has put his fabricators on overtime to catch up and make sure that they're going to meet that criteria. Otherwise, it's going to cost us $1,000 a day per vehicle. We don't want
right.
So then he's got them on what we consider to be the self-directed extended. So they're going to work that Friday, but they're banking those hours in the future, much like what we explained before.
And that also goes to our normal mechanics that are in the field, in the districts. They're on mandatory overtime also to keep the equipment operating.
Mr. Jeffries.
Mr. Director, I appreciate your opportunity to meet with you. I'm the Vice Chair of Transportation in here in the Assembly, so
Nice to meet you.
we need to spend some time together. This $1,000 a day fine, who's proposed to levy that fine? What agency?
Air Resources Board.
California Air Resources
Yes, sir.
Board. Was your budget augmented to do the retrofits to all the vehicles to meet the California Air Resource Board requirements?
Yes, sir.
Yes, it was.
And so the issue of the timing is then an issue of having enough staff on hand or enough equipment to actually perform the retrofit. The deadline that you're encountering, the 10-hour work days, if you knew this was coming and your budget was augmented, it would seem that you should have been able to anticipate this need, although I probably don't agree with it being done in the first place to you, but that's another story. So the question is, were you able to anticipate this coming, and why work so many people so hard if you knew it was coming?
The reason that we went to the mandatory overtime is we did not get augmented the positions to do the work. We got augmented dollars to do it. So we started contracting the work out initially, and there was a grievance filed by the union saying that was permanent civil service class work, so we had to bring the work back into Caltrans. So that was part of the problem. The other part of the problem is getting enough of the pieces that need to be retrofitted from the suppliers, because when you go out and buy this much material from somebody, it takes a while to get delivery of that. So that was an issue also, was taking delivery of everything that we needed to retrofit.
So you're working people 10 hours a day, putting them on furloughs because of a union grievance that they had to do the work to begin with? I mean, I don't think the union would want, I mean, maybe I've got this wrong here, but why would you want to put your people through that instead of allowing contractors to do the work?
Even without the furloughs, the schedule was extremely aggressive, and we're doing everything we can to meet the timeline that was set in law. We're one of the few state agencies that has this big mandate. We did get an augmentation in our budget the last few years to purchase the equipments to meet air quality, and now we're working to get the staff to make sure that we meet that timeline.
Okay.
Director Wasaki,
Just one thing. We will follow up on the issue of adequate staffing in the budget as we move forward. And I mean, it's important that you be fully staffed to do the things that you need to do. But go ahead with your question. Thank you.
thank you very much. I appreciate it. The retrofitting that you're talking about are the diesel retrofits that are required as a part of the CARB determination. Is that correct?
Well, yes, you can do it two ways. You can you can retrofit your diesel engines or your fleet, or you can replace them with gasoline engines.
But the regulations requiring the retrofitting were suspended last week, being
Commercial.
for commercial only, not for the
I had
state.
I had asked for an exemption.
Mr. Bloomfield, I think that's something that needs to be more openly vetted out, and something that we need to take up as a subcommittee. The fact that we're asking the state, and more specifically the taxpayers, to have to bear the burden of this massive overtime, the loss of wages on our state employees for the furlough days that become a part of this equation, and no relief in sight, notwithstanding the current economic condition, is just absolutely egregious. And the fact that we can do it for commercial fleets, but not the state of California and the state taxpayers who are footing the bill, strikes me as incongruous.
Okay, if we have any other questions, do we have any public testimony on this issue? Any members of the public wish to add their voice? Okay, if that's the case, we'll move on to the fourth and final issue. And this is really the issue about federal funds. In many ways, this is probably one of the most important issues for moving us forward. Stimulus money, the federal stimulus provides the state with about $3.7 billion in one-time formula funding for transportation programs. It provides a lot of opportunities to apply competitive federal programs for shovel-ready projects. In the 09-10 budget, $1.1 billion was appropriated to Caltrans for statewide projects and $1.6 billion for local projects. To date, the department, as I understand it, has nearly bid out 92% of those funds. The LAO reports, however, there's about $270 million in local funds that need to be obligated by February, or else the state's required to obligate them to statewide projects managed by the department. So I'd like to ask what's going on with that, with the local money, and what are our plans for making sure that California doesn't lose any money, and and then go through some of those issues, and then sort of talk more generally about the different pots of federal money that are out there, and hear from you all the things that we are doing to get ourselves ready and prepared to be competitive for all that money, and things that we need to do, both Caltrans needs to do, or the legislature may need to do, or we collectively in California need to do, because that has got to be a top priority. So,
Thank you. Thank you. The Recovery Act, it couldn't come at a better time for California. Last year, the state, as you mentioned, we got about almost $1 billion of the $2.57 billion. We put those to work on 57 projects, shop projects, rehabilitation type projects, and 4 long-lasting in the eyes of the Federal Highway Administration, the United States Department of Transportation, I-215 in San Bernardino, SR 905 in San Diego, the Caldecott Tunnel, State Route 24. That's been awarded, and then we had the 405 in Los Angeles County, the HOV lane, $1 billion project using some of it is Recovery Act. And so we've been getting a lot of great bid savings. We've actually funded more projects, and the funding has lapsed or moved over into funding this year's projects for the shops. We're very, very excited about that. The local agencies got $1.6 billion. Let me just start out by saying that it's not always what you see. They're doing everything they can to get that money put to work so that we do not lose a dime of that Recovery Act dollars. That's the last thing that we want to do. Caltrans and I have pledged our team, Denix, Ambia, the local assistance division chief is working day and night to ensure that we supply our partners, the local agencies in the regions, with any support that they need to get this money put to work. And so the LAO report noticed that they said, Caltrans, you've done a good job in obligating 92%, but the locals need some focus. And it appears that way. I think that we have, from a Caltrans perspective, when the legislation was enacted that split the money up, we supplied or asked for a December, actually I think it was yesterday. Yesterday we asked all local agencies to report if they were going to have any problems obligating any of their money so that we could take it and make some adjustments so that we can give the money back to the region or to the state to then obligate on another project so that we don't lose any money. And so that information is being sent to the districts yesterday. We're analyzing it. We should have a better handle on this obligation issue. On the award side, you know, that's where the rubber hits the road. It's not really the obligation, but when you award a contract to a contractor, they go out and they hire the people then, and they buy the supplies and buy the aggregate and all those kinds of things. And so that's really something that we're focused in on. But the due date is March the 2nd to obligate all the money. And so by February, early February, if we see that they can't move that money, we've got what we call Plan B, probably Plan D by now, but we're looking at those projects that we have ready that can take that money and use it and get that money to work. And so I think that we've had great cooperation with the regions. We've had a number of phone conversations with the local agencies in the regions just to make sure that they know that we're here to help, and we're doing everything we can to help them get their money put to work, because it's all about, as you said before, Chairperson, it's all about jobs. And this is a great stimulus. It couldn't have come at a better time for California.
Yeah. Well, what are the statewide projects? Obviously, you have some sweeper projects, so to speak, that are there ready for if there's any local money that they cannot obligate. What's the main state project that you're going to put that money into for a quick obligation? Because you only have a very short window to get that out.
Well, for the first call for the money will actually go to the MPO or the region, the level. So they have a number of projects. The way this thing is set up.
The timing on that?
February the 1st.
Is when does it go from the local not being able to spend it to the region, and then from the region to the state?
Oh, well, they'll go to the region here very shortly. If Reedley, where I'm from, can't spend they didn't get any Recovery Act money, but if they did and they couldn't spend their money, then it would go up to the Fresno COG, and the Fresno COG would then spend it. That's now. So if I admit to you now, or to me, the state, now that, hey, I can't spend the money, this project is going south, there's no way I can obligate it because the Federal Highway Administration would never recognize this thing being ready for construction, the plans aren't even done, then it goes to the COG, and the COG then looks for another project in that vicinity. And then by February the 1st, that's where Norma's team comes into place. If Fresno COG says we don't have any project, or before, then we'll find that project to put that money on. So it's not just a matter of, we have a laundry list of projects that we're looking at, but we don't have to make a decision yet until the first part of next year, or maybe in February.
Is there one?
We have a number of state SHOP projects that are going to be voted on by the Commission at the January CTC meeting. And at that time, we're working with the Commission so that we either put regular federal funds, or we have the ability by March 1st to change the color of money to federal ARA funds, so there are no funds lost to California. And then we would use the remaining federal obligation on other SHOP projects. So we have a plan in place, and we'll be working with the Commission to put those monies on state SHOP projects after February 1st.
Great. That's what I want to hear, that guarantee that $0 will be lost, and we will be positioned to take down every other state who manages to not spend all their money. We have a place to spend it here. Do you guys have questions on this issue? What about the different federal pots? There's a number of federal funds out there. There's the transportation appropriation, the defense appropriation bills doing some of this stimulus, the jobs bill, which is just passed out of committee in Washington today, I believe, and then the T-bill, which is the big $500 billion. What are the key steps that you're doing to position ourselves to maximize dollars on all of those bills, all those federal funds?
I can't, the defense and all those kinds of things, I can tell you what we're doing if there's what we are affectionately calling STIM 2. If there's a Stimulus 2 package, and I guess that's the part of the question that I can answer. is through AASHTO, we have been polled on what projects are ready to go. And so we've issued a list of projects that we have on the shelf ready to go. That we have $2 billion worth of bond-funded projects on the shelf ready to go today. So that's part of that equation if there's a STEM 2 package. Because our read on STEM 2 is that it has to be 50% has to be awarded within 90 days. And that's pretty tough to do, to award a contract to a contractor within 90 days. So whoever, I mean, that is going to be difficult to do. So, I mean, that's just tough. So we got bond projects ready to go, $2 billion. We have $125 million worth of transit projects ready to go that are bond funded as well. We have shop projects that are on the shelf that are waiting allocation that we could put STEM 2 money on. And then we have some Track 2 or some intercity rail projects that are ready to go as well within, maybe not within 90 days, but we have some that are ready to go. So we put a package together, a little over $4 billion. But that's on the transportation side. I can't speak to the defense or the T and all those things.
Well, those are all transportation related as well. I mean, the defense appropriation, there's $636 billion that will go to vehicles to pass the number of extensions. It's basically they're using that bill as a way to extend the safety loop bill because they're not going to authorize that for a little while. So they're putting a fair amount of money through. So we need to be positioned. It's interim safety loop, if you would, or T money. We need to make sure we're positioned to capture that. And then the jobs bill, of course. I mean, there's all the bills that I mentioned. There's a tremendous amount of transportation money, and it's all different. And I'm sure that there's a lobbying operation going on. I would hope for for DC because this is a huge amount of money.
Yeah, AASHTO does a lot of our lobbying for us on the Hill for transportation piece of it. During the last bill, what we did...
But isn't AASHTO's the overall group? That's not California specific.
No, that's not. You're right. But what they do is they try to get the most out of all those bills for transportation. Then it's our job to go in there, and what we did last time in the Recovery Act, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, is we had a spreadsheet of all the available funds in it. So, for example, we got almost $1 million to do diesel retrofit in Southern California through the Recovery Act, but it wasn't transportation, but it was energy? Yeah, I think Department of Energy. And so we were able to get a non-transportation related grant to help retrofit our diesel engines in Southern California. So our people, and I use the term affectionately, are very greedy, and so they go through these bills with a fine-tooth comb trying to find, is there any money that we can get then to apply for to bring back to California.
Yeah. It sounds, though, that you're talking about all the efforts on the backside after the bills have been sort of passed and moved through. What I'm talking about is getting out in front of the curve, pushing ideas like public transit money and pushing ideas that are beneficial to California, like the CMAQ money, the money that is air quality for transportation. We can have an influence over what that money looks like on the front end, and by doing that, we may change the equation by hundreds of millions of dollars.
We do. We have ongoing conversations with the congressional delegation. We've provided information to the governor's staff in Washington. We take every opportunity to provide what California needs from a federal bill. And we have projects that are ready. Our SHOP program, the local subvention program, all of that is dependent on federal funds. And so we look to any opportunity to provide suggestions on where the funds should go and what rules or processes need to be changed in order for us to utilize the money most effectively for California.
Okay. I want to make sure that we get in the loop on that because I think we can add a lot of value. We need to make sure that we're all rowing in the same direction vis-a-vis our congressional delegation, vis-a-vis the administration. So any information that you've been providing to all the folks that you mentioned, if you could as soon as possible give us a copy of that, because we're having our own independent conversations trying to push more transportation dollars, more stimulus money, and we need to make sure we're on the same page.
We can certainly do that, and there is a California reauthorization group that's made up of legislative staff, MPOs, a number of folks that we work together with. So yes, we'd be happy to pass on information to you.
Okay, any other comments on this topic? Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on this issue? You have someone? Hello?
Thank you, Assemblymember Blumenfeld. I'm Catherine Phillips with Environmental Defense Fund. We're actually doing quite a bit on the federal transportation bill, and we're part of a national coalition called Transportation for America. And I was in D.C., was it a week? I got back last Monday, so the week before that and last Monday, talking to some of the California representatives. California is going to have an extremely powerful or certainly influential position this time around. The Speaker of the House comes from California. The chair of the committee that will be handling the transportation bill on the Senate side comes from California. There are, vocal and important members of California's congressional delegation on the House Transportation Committee. Another aspect that's going to have an influence, that California is going to have an influence on, is that the administration is very concerned about climate change. The administration is going to be looking for ways to ensure that the transportation money helps make sure that America can reduce its greenhouse gases from the transportation sector as well as other pollution. I think that California, because we've taken a lead on climate change reduction, because we generally have a historic understanding of air pollution, regular air pollution, and what the transportation link is there, I think we are going to probably be able to be in better position than any other state to take advantage of programs for funding that are merit-based, that are based on performance. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to go there. Just, you mentioned that the jobs bill had just been gone through committee this morning. My understanding is they were going to try to vote on it today. It may have been voted on right now. I don't know, because a number of members needed to leave town today. Leave D.C. But the jobs bill has a total of $36.7 billion for transportation. Of that, $27.5 billion is in highway funding, and about $8.4 billion is in transit funding. Of that transit funding piece, about $6.1 billion is formula grant, and it's basically geared towards transit buses, that sort of thing. Just as in the last round of ARA, they have allowed in the language that 10% of the transit funding can be used on operations. This is going to be really important to this state. I think all of you understand the seriousness of the lack of funding for operations, for paying the drivers, for paying the mechanics, the impact that's having around the state on transit programs. At a time when gas prices are pretty high and people are looking more towards public transit, we're losing transit routes, we're losing transit drivers. One of the easiest ways to put Americans back to work, to put Californians back to work, is to restore some of that transit operations money. I think this jobs bill is just gone through the House. It will be taken up by the Senate in January. I think there's still more opportunity to see that there's more transit operations money available. And then we're going to have to do what we can as a state to make sure we can get as much of that back to California as possible. I think Senator Boxer, who is playing a significant role in putting together the package for the jobs bill in the Senate, it would be important to make sure that she hears that there is support from legislators for seeing some substantial transit operations money, more than the 10%. We would like to see more flexibility, more like a 20% flexibility allowed. And on the federal transportation bill itself, there are a couple of things out there extending it. It will definitely be extended until February. That's sort of a backstop, anticipating that in case the Senate can't pass its bill by January, its jobs bill, there's a backstop to make sure that the transportation bill goes at least until February. But the House jobs bill is calling for extension of safety lieu until September of 2010. So that gives a signal that I think we can anticipate that between now and September of 2010 there will be a lot of activity on the federal transportation bill. Whether it does become a $500 or a $500 billion bill as the House version is still uncertain. But I do think that there's a lot of opportunity in this bill. There's a lot of interest in reform of how the money is distributed, a lot of interest in seeing more of the money distributed on a performance basis. And again, that's very good for California because we're already showing some of that kind of performance basis funding here, and we're used to that approach.
Exactly.
Thank you very much for that important update on that, and I couldn't agree with you more about the need for transit money and additional transit flexibility, and certainly we'll be pushing that from my end and trying to get the legislature to help push that idea.
And I should add that, you know, Environmental Defense Fund, and I know this is true of other environmental organizations that we've been working with in the state, we're all very interested in being as helpful as possible to make sure we get some good transit money and other transportation money for the kinds of projects that we all recognize will help us modernize the system while at the same time reducing its environmental impact. So I look forward to working with Caltrans as you guys move forward. I know we haven't been involved in the discussion with the MPOs on the general outline, but now you know we're here. So.
Thank you. Any other members of the public? Before I close, do either of my colleagues want to have a closing statement or closing comments?
Just thank you very much, Director Wasaki. I appreciate your time and that of your staffs today. Just again, considering the lateness of the year, really appreciate that. As an aside, I would like to talk to you about something that is off the agenda just real quickly. And I only raise this, even though the issue is specific to my district and seemingly not of great import as it relates to the statewide thing. It's symptomatic of a bigger problem that I'm concerned with, and that is the installation of a traffic signal along Route Highway 18 up in the San Bernardino Mountains. That's something that Caltrans is going forward with. I only raised the issue not to talk specifically about that, but there was I've actually had a very good working relationship with District 7 and District 8, the two that I interact with by virtue of the cross-county boundaries that I represent. But on this instance, it's been this very frustrating process working with our District 7 folks, or excuse me, District 8 folks, because there's this strange arrogance that I don't know how to explain, except to say that we were told about the project after the project had already been awarded and contracted for the first time, and then when the community raised substantive complaints and concerns about it, we're essentially told, as politely as possible, but nonetheless told, thanks very much for the input, but the decision's already been made and we're going forward. That is, again, this is not necessarily an indictment on that one project, but rather just sort of the manner in which that took place, I think, is symptomatic of exactly the kind of attitude that used to be much more pervasive in Caltrans and has been in many years remedied. And I'd hate to see it rear its ugly head again. I'm very frustrated by that, and I'm embarrassed to go back to my community and explain why Caltrans is telling everyone tough. And I just wanted to raise that issue publicly with you.
May I respond?
I would love that.
Four-legged stool is my approach: customer service, partnerships, efficiency, and innovation. I'll apologize to you publicly because it's a T intersection on Route 18. The signal project is warranted. The minor road is stopped. 18 is through. There's been a number of side swipes, and it's met warrants for traffic signal installation. What we try to do is we try to go out to the public because generally they want a signal. In this case, we don't want a signal. And we try to take the time through the environmental process to explain what we want to do here and the reasons why we're putting the signal in. We're not putting it in because we want to delay anybody's commute. We're putting it in because we have an accident problem and a number of the same kind of repeating accidents that are occurring, that the tool is a signal light phased properly will save people's lives. And I know that it's too late in the game for those things. You have a great district director now, Ray Wolf. I call him Dr. Ray Wolf. He's a great guy. Meet with him. He's trying to partner with you. He apologized. He let me know about this intersection. And what I try to do is say, let's step back. Can we step back? But the problem is the other problem that we have is tort liability, in at least in the state, for sure for Caltrans. We spend $60-some-odd million a year on tort. And so what we're trying to do is our safety's first. We're trying to mitigate some of these issues. And the tool to do that in that case is a signal light at that three-legged intersection. The problem is we didn't do the partnership and the customer service piece, and so I apologize to you for that. And what I asked to do is ask them to step back. But once that project is started and somebody, God forbid, is injured or killed at that intersection, we're going to have a problem.
And no question about it, I recognize the legal ramifications of not taking action at this point. Again, my frustration is not so much with that,
Right.
notwithstanding the community's concern, but just the backwards approach that was taken in this instance. And now I understand that there's even some suggestion that there's going to be a potential survey sent out to residents. And I'm not entirely sure what is hoped to be gained by that, except to exacerbate and irritate constituents who clearly have made their concerns known. And so if you were not already aware of that, I just wanted to bring that to your attention, because it's something that I don't want to have to go back and explain why we're spending taxpayer dollars on surveys for that which is a foregone conclusion.
We'll find out. You want us to get back to you?
I would like that very much.
Sure, we will.
Very good. Well, Mr. Iwasaki, I really appreciate you coming here. I know this was not the welcome basket of issues that you wanted to be your first appearance before the committee. We will continue to always ask the tough questions, and we will continue on issues of efficacy. We're always going to, whether it's in a hearing or talking to you personally or dealing with the bureaucracy, we're going to be looking at those issues very closely. But we're also going to be working with you on getting this federal money and on working with you to build California and improve our infrastructure. And I really look forward to working with you as a partner over the years to come. And so welcome.
Thank you.
And thank you very much. And this hearing is now adjourned.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Mr.